last week, so it should work this week. Well, we're on to chapter 2 of the story, and I really, again, as I go through this myself a second time, really enjoy how Pastor Frazie's got this all set up for us and lined up. It's really well done. I know that I've been enjoying it. Again, I don't know. Do you guys have any questions left over from last week? Where's Sharon? That was my question. What? Oh, okay. She's on vacation, huh? Okay. All right. Well, good for her. Sometimes we don't get out of Dodge County very often. Probably a good idea to see what happens outside of Dodge County on occasion. That's how I always would tease Dave Warner about that. And even though it was teasing, it wasn't too far from the truth. All right, we're going to watch the video. I'm going to go get the sheets.
This is your story. This is my story. But most of all, this is the greatest story ever told. This is God's story.
The Lord said to Abram, "Go from your country, your people, and your father's household to the land I will show you. I will make you into a great nation, and I will bless you. I will make your name great, and you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and whoever curses you I will curse, and all peoples on earth will be blessed through you." So Abram went, as the Lord had told him, and Lot went with him. Abram was 75 years old when he set out from Haran. He took his wife Sarai, his nephew Lot, all the possessions they had accumulated, and the people they had acquired in Haran, and they set out for the land of Canaan, and they arrived there. After this, the word of the Lord came to Abram in a vision. "Do not be afraid, Abram. I am your shield, your very great reward." But Abram said, "Sovereign Lord, what can you give me since I remain childless, and the one who will inherit my estate is Eliezer of Damascus?" And Abram said, "You have given me no children, so a servant in my household will be my heir." Then the word of the Lord came to him, "This man will not be your heir, but a son who is your own flesh and blood will be your heir." He took him outside and said, "Look up at the sky and count the stars, if indeed you can count them." And he said to him, "So shall your offspring be." Abram believed the Lord, and he credited it to him as righteousness.
You know you're old when it takes you a couple tries to get over a speed bump. You know you're old when it takes you longer to rest than it did to get tired. When a 30-year-old mortgage sounds like a pretty clever scam. When your best friend is dating someone half their age and isn't breaking any laws. You know you're old when you discover the meaning of life, but then you forgot to write it down. You know you're old when you often repeat things. You often repeat things. You often repeat things. You know age has a way of sneaking up on all of us eventually. It can leave you with that sense that the best of your life is behind you. Maybe it's not age for you, but just that sense that you missed out on your chance at life to fulfill your dreams or to do something really meaningful. Well, if that's how you feel, chapter 2 of the story is going to be really good news for you. There's a noticeable pattern with God in the Bible where he picks the person to help him with his plan to get us back, who in the lower story sees themselves as the least qualified person for the job. In chapter 1 of the story, God unveiled his vision. He simply wanted to come down into the lower story, which he created, and be with us. But the first people, Adam and Eve, didn't embrace that vision, and as a result, were escorted from the garden. A spiritual virus was born in Adam and Eve that creates the option for evil and selfishness in our lives and our relationships with others. This kind of lifestyle has no place in the community of God. We also learned that this spiritual virus, which the Bible simply calls sin, is transmitted to all of Adam's offspring, and that means us. We found in the story of Noah that the plan to get us back into a relationship with God will not come from people, not even from the best of us. So God begins to unveil his plan in chapter 2 to get us back. He's going to create a brand new nation. Why? Through this nation, set apart for his purposes, he will reveal his presence and his power and his plan to get us back. People of all nations who watch this new nation will be able to discover and see what God is up to. So the first order of business is to pick a couple to get this nation started. Now, who would you pick? A young, vibrant, good-looking, healthy, influential couple with a medically proven capacity to crank out lots of children? That's how we think in the lower story. But God thinks differently in the upper story. Later in the story, Isaiah will tell us that his ways are higher than our ways. God selects an old couple named Abram and Sarai. When God first taps him on the shoulder, Abram is 75 and Sarai is 65. They've got their AARP card in hand, discounts at Denny's for the early seating, and collect Social Security checks monthly. In addition to this, in addition to their age, Sarai is barren. She can't have any children. Why does God pick them? He does this so when people see this great nation, they will see not the strength of Abram and Sarai, but their weakness. They will see God as the one above the scenes of their lives building this amazing nation. They will see his presence. They will see his power and his plan unfolding. At the opening of chapter 2, God invites Abram to go and leave the comforts of his homeland to a place that God would show him. And he promised to not only give them children, but to make them into a great nation. Not only this, but this new nation would one day be a blessing to all people on the earth. Abram likely didn't comprehend this completely, but God was saying to him, I'm going to use you and this nation as my plan to provide a way for all people to come back into the garden. The Bible simply says, so Abram went. In Hebrews chapter 11, we are told, by faith Abraham, when called to go to a place he would later receive as his inheritance, obeyed and went, even though he did not know where he was going. Now, there's one thing I know about senior citizens. Being the proud possessor of my own AARP card, we don't like change. How many senior citizens does it take to change a light bulb? Change. Who said anything about change? But this older couple dug deep, got way out beyond their comfort zone, and believed in God. This is their only claim to fame. The story doesn't unfold as smoothly as you'd think. The first order of business is to start popping out kids, right? To have a nation, you got to have peoples, at least one. That's logic to us lower story dwellers. Yet 10 years go by and still no children. Abram is now 85 and Sarai 75. So Sarah gets to thinking, maybe God needs our help. That phrase always leads to disaster. She concocts a plan where Abram sleeps with her servant Hagar. Abram, as suspected, puts up no objections. They have a child named Ishmael. God comes to them and says, I will make Ishmael's offspring into a great nation, but this is not my plan. Ishmael is the father of the Arab nation and the foundation of Islam. 13 more years go by and still no child. Abram is now 99 and Sarai 89. God comes to them and changes their names. Abram's name, which ironically means father in Hebrew, is changed to Abraham, which means father of many. Ouch. Sarai's name, which means princess in Hebrew, is changed to Sarah, which means queen. Ouch. Hard names to live up to. Finally, a year later, Sarah has a child who's named Isaac. Isaac means laughter. You'd laugh too if you had a child when you were 100 years old. But the story isn't over. When Isaac is around 15 years old, just about to get his camel's license, God comes to Abraham and asks him to do a crazy, I mean completely crazy thing. Abraham is now 115 and Sarah 105. Optimal years for raising teenagers, wouldn't you say? Here's how it reads. God said, take your son, your only son, whom you love, Isaac, and go to the region of Moriah. Sacrifice him there as a burnt offering on a mountain I will show you. You know, I'm just the average Joe trying to get by in the lower story, but this seems completely insane. But Abraham obeys. We're told in the story, or in Hebrews chapter 11, that Abraham figured that God would raise Isaac from the dead. Now that's faith. As Abraham was bringing the knife down to take the life of his son, an angel, likely Jesus himself, told Abraham to stop. That God has provided a ram whose horns have gotten caught in the thicket. Abraham sacrifices the ram and takes his son home. Whew, that was close. Well, we are told that Isaac gets married to a gal named Rebekah. Now listen to this. They are married 20 years before they have their first child. This nation-building thing is really off to a slow start. But they have twins, Jacob and Esau, and we're told that Jacob has 12 children. Finally, we've got some real momentum. You think you're too old? You think you've missed your chance to do something big, something significant? That's the way we think in the lower story. But if we align our lives to God and what He's up to, some of our best years are still ahead of us. Oh, one more thing you may have noticed. Embedded in this incredible story is a clue of what is to come. In the story, God said to Abraham, take your son, your only son, whom you love, Isaac, and go to the region of Moriah. Sacrifice him there as a burnt offering on a mountain I will show you. Compare this with John chapter 3 and verse 16 of the New Testament, where God so loved the world that He gave His one and only Son. See the parallel? But not only that, do you know where the hill of Moriah is? 2 Chronicles chapter 3 and verse 1 tells us that it is the place that will later become the city of Jerusalem. It is the same hill 2,080 years later that God's one and only Son, Jesus, would be offered up as a sacrifice on a cross.
This is your
All right, I'm going to hand out these sheets. Again, they do have the answers on the back, so there's going to doubtlessly be quite a few questions that we're not going to get to. In fact, I'm not even going to attempt to answer a lot of these. I want to take it in a little slightly different direction than where a lot of this goes. But I guess question number 5 is a good spot to jump off from. God used people like Abraham, Sarah, and Jacob to accomplish His plan and purpose. Explain how these people were both flawed and faithful, and in what way are we very much like them? Right. They were 75 when God first promised that He would make them into a great nation. Yep. It didn't look very promising, did it? That this older couple would become the parents of a brand new nation and a numerous nation, a nation of many people. Absolutely, I think those are. But can you think of other times in the Bible when God does exactly this same thing, where He finds someone who is in many ways, the most unlikely of people to do his work. And then he chooses them, calls them, appoints them, and then sends them out to do his work. But there's you could find lots of examples. Old Testament, New Testament. This is the pattern for God. In other words, we're going to see this pattern. Well, first of all, the 12 disciples, right? They were, what were they? Well, fishermen. They wouldn't necessarily have been your first choice for evangelists. Okay, who do we want to go and tell people about Jesus? Oh, the fishermen. They've got really good verbal communication skills. Yeah. There's just some people that maybe on the outside that doesn't look like the best choice. How about the Apostle Paul? Right? God says, all right, I want to choose somebody who's going to be my great missionary to the Gentiles. Who does he pick? A guy who's running around killing Christians. Right? And I think the reason why God does this over and over again, and it's a pattern, is, well, Randy Frazee kind of pointed at it a little bit, so that people don't get so caught up in the person, but they understand that it's God that's working through the person. That God is the one who's doing the awesome thing. That it's not Abraham and Sarah that we should look up to. That they're not the ones that did this. And that's kind of why he lets 25 years go by, right? So he makes the promise at 25 years, and then to basically make sure that no one would possibly think that this was Abraham and Sarah's idea, he lets them become 100 years old before they have a child, so that everyone knows this is God at work. This can be no other thing. God does this with Zechariah in the temple. Zechariah and Elizabeth, remember? They were unable to have children. And they were old, and Elizabeth was barren, and God came to them and said, you're going to have a son, and you're going to give him the name John. And it was impossible for them to have children. But he did it so that we can focus on that this is God at work. God is at work here. This is not a human plan. This is not man's idea. This isn't some sort of cleverly devised thing that human beings have come up with. No, God is clearly at work, and he is at work doing his thing, and he's using deeply flawed people to do it, so that we don't give any credit to the deeply flawed people. And by the way, I think this is pastors, right? I mean, why doesn't God give the job of preaching and teaching and administering his sacraments, baptizing children and handling the holy things of God, the body and blood of Christ, why doesn't God give that job to angels? Wouldn't they be much better at it? Wouldn't an angel command more respect if you had an angel standing up here instead of Pastor Kesting? Yeah, that's the point. The point is that God uses broken, well, in the book of Corinthians, it refers to, Paul refers to the ambassadors of Christ, pastors, as cracked clay jars. We have this awesome thing inside of us, but we have this awesome message to deliver. But the vessel that it comes in, the container that it comes in, that's not never mind that. It's a broken, sinful person, the same as everybody else. But the message that they have is the important thing. The pastor isn't the important thing. The message is the important thing. That's kind of an interesting to think about when a guy's holding a call, huh? The other thing that I want to talk about briefly, it's not on the sheet really so much, is God's sense of timing. So often, God leaves us scratching our head and we just go, what are you doing, God? So think about this. So God created the world. Do you know how many years passed from creation to Abraham? Yeah. From creation to Abraham. How many years passed? 2,000. 2,000 is a correct answer, but it's a correct answer, but not for that question. Right. It's 2,000 years from Abraham to Jesus. So that's where the 2,000 years. But what I'm asking about is how many years from Adam and Eve to Abraham? Well, it's roughly between like 6,000 and maybe 10,000 years. Okay? So God promises to, no, I'm sorry. I said it's 4 to 6. I'm going to take that back. My 6 to 10, I'm going to shrink it down to 4 to 6,000 years. But anyways, my point is that God promises to Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden that he's going to send a descendant who's going to crush Satan's head and and you know how long it takes him to fulfill that promise? A long time, right? Why? Why does God wait so long before he tells Abraham that he's going to get it started? And then how come it takes 2,000 years for the plan to actually happen, right? It takes 2,000 years from Abraham to the time that Jesus is born. And how come it's 2,000 plus years since Jesus has ascended into heaven, and we know he promises us that he's coming back, and he hasn't come back yet? It could be any day. But the point is that God timing is not our timing. And we are reminded of that so many times, aren't we? When we have maybe a loved one who's sick and maybe who has cancer or something like that. And we're praying for that person, and we want that person to beat the cancer, to survive. And then God takes that person home. And we're left wondering, God, what are you doing? Why? I don't know if you heard about I don't know a lot of details, but I know that it was maybe about a couple of weeks ago that young Wells pastor in his 30s, died of COVID. Left a wife and 4 young children and a church. And we are in a significant pastor shortage right now. There are over 100 vacancies in our synod right now. There have been now for years. So we're kind of used to hearing that number, but it's still that should shock you. There's 100 churches that don't have a pastor right now. And we look at this and we go, God, what are you doing? I mean, we're already short, and now you take this guy home to heaven. And we wonder about the timing of it, right? We wonder about what the time, but God's timing is always off to us. Why did I get this call now? I'll tell you. A couple of weeks ago, Sam and I were talking, and I was still struggling with some of the after effects of COVID, just physically as well as mentally. And I told Sam, I said, the last thing I need right now is a call, because of all the stress that a call brings into your life. And at that point, I was stressed out. I didn't, and I would still say that I am just coming out of this. I'm not 100% whole yet. And you go, what the timing, right, God? What the timing? I don't understand. I mean, so often we don't understand God's timing. So many times. And yet we look at this and we look at what God is doing, and he knows exactly what he's doing, doesn't he? He tells Abraham and Sarah that they're going to have a child, and then he makes them sit on it for 25 years. One reason God can maybe do that is so that we learn to trust in his promises, that he is going to be good to his word. And another thing that Abraham and Sarah learned, right, is that it's not a good idea when we come up with our own, if God's not moving fast enough to come up with our own solutions, to force our timing onto God. Instead of waiting for God's timing for us, to force our timing onto God. And of course, that's what Sarai and Hagar did with Abraham, and that was a bad idea. Well, God's taken his time. He promised, and we believe it's promised, that Abraham's going to be the father of many nations, but they figure, well, it's not going to be with me because I'm barren. So here, we'll come up with our own solution, our own end around God's promise. We'll make it so God's promise comes true. God doesn't need our help, does he? God has a plan, and his plan is a good one, and he's going to keep that plan. I don't know why God takes certain people and leaves others. I wish I knew. I don't know why there are people right now who are praying to God every night, Jesus, come and get me. I'm ready. And they're still here. And this pastor who's 35 years old is in heaven. I don't think he was praying that God would come and take him. Not now. He was probably hoping that he'd be able to spend more time with his family and serve his congregation. But God's ways are so much higher than our ways, and his paths are beyond our searching out. And as you read the Bible, you see these grand themes show up. The more you read the Bible, the more you see them. And that's why it's good to go through this a second time, even though we've already gone through it. But just as we read the story, just watch how God chooses cracked clay jars to do awesome things with, because he wants us to see what he's up to and not what we're up to. It's not about us. It never has been. It never will be. Sometimes we forget that. But why don't we bow our heads in prayer? Dear Heavenly Father, you are an awesome God, and you have a plan for this world and for us and for our lives. And sometimes we just don't understand it. We're left confused. And it's when we're left confused, Lord, that we ask that you would help us to run to you and know that you do have a plan for us, and that your ways are higher than our ways, and that your paths are beyond our searching out. And it's not up to us to try and figure out what you're doing, but simply to believe that you are good and that you are doing what is for our good. We ask that you would give us the faith to trust in you, even when it's difficult to trust in you. We pray this in Jesus' name. Amen. All right. Well, I'll shake hands. Then I'll come back and turn all that stuff off.